Hello, welcome to the first meeting back from the summer. I can't believe summer's already over. So we'll call the meeting to order and look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we'll get right up into the meeting. So introduction of new business. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. Minutes of the June 2018 meeting. Look for a mover and a seconder and any discussion. Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Matt Brown. It's Mayor Brown. That works, okay. All those in favor? And it carries. Human Resources Report, Deputy Chief Longworth. Seeing any, subject to any questions? That means it's a great report, so look for a mover and seconder. Moved by Susan, seconded by Javid. All those in favor? And it carries. Quarterly reports, Chief Williams on complaints against police. Want to speak to it, or? Look for any board members. Councillor Helmer?
Just in terms of the different kinds of complaints that are coming forward, I wonder, do you see anything that is of concern, any kind of trends over the 5-year period we're looking at that we should be aware of? It looks pretty stable, but I just wonder if there's any insights from senior management.
Short answer is no. We look at the complaints annually, obviously, for any trends, and it's fairly stable and fairly consistent. They're neither up or down right now.
Seeing any other speakers? I just wanted to also add, I know that in the past, at least, I would say maybe 3-4 years, that we've seen more education and awareness of complaint processes, and as well as the police administration putting that out and that information as well out. So have we seen that as helpful in maybe driving some of the, people understanding the process a little bit more and maybe impacting the numbers, I guess?
The numbers are fairly stable, but it is a complicated process, even for us to understand at times. So it's a matter of educating the public as we receive the complaints and navigate through the process.
Great, thank you. Look for any other speakers. Look, Javid.
So I appreciate the report, and I think it does show things have been mostly stable over time. The one thing I would ask, if we know, is questions around the huge variation in terms of time and some of the challenges I'm sure that the force is facing internally, being able to calibrate what kinds of reports are taking longer time periods versus less, and how to advocate for us as a board that we push for more timely resolution of some of these issues.
Most of the complaints that we investigate internally are handled fairly quickly. It always depends on the number of officers involved and the complexity of investigations. The ones that typically take the longest are the Section 11 investigations. So they are the parallel investigations that occur following an SIU investigation. And we're in the position where we need to wait until the SIU investigation is complete before we can even start. So those are the ones that will bump up the average time. And we've spoken about this before, but it's a matter of the SIU completing their investigation in a timely manner, and that doesn't occur.
Anyone else? All right, so look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Javid. Oh, sorry, moved by Helmer, seconded by Javid. All those in favor? And it carries. Bail Safety Project Quarterly Report, Ministry of the Attorney General.
The correspondence, I think. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I missed something. My apologies. Public reports and correspondence. Any questions from the board? All right, look for, sorry, go ahead, Susan.
Quick question. I'm just wondering, some of them were forwarded, addressed to the board, but forwarded on to management to respond as they were operational. I'm just wondering in terms of follow-up, it looks to me like there's a request for a representative from the board to be invited to DIAC, the Diversity Committee, and another one for the Animal Welfare. Is it truly that the board shouldn't have been invited, and what was the follow-up from LPS?
So you might remember in the summer that I did send a call out for somebody to attend from the board. And then when I got back to this group, they were putting their meetings on hold. Does that ring a bell to you? Yes. And I said to them, and I said, well, when is the next one? Because our folks are busy and we want to schedule in our calendars, and they didn't even know. So I left it in their court to get back to us.
Thanks, Jennifer.
All right, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Javid, seconded by Susan. All those in favor? And it carries. My apologies. So now back to Bail Safety Project Quarterly Report, and I believe Helmer had his hand up for that one. Nope, okay. Look for any discussion on that. Look for a mover. Javid, seconded by Susan. All those in favor? And it carries. Chaplaincy Program, and Chief Bear?
Yeah, just thought I'd bring to the board's attention that Imam Munir Al-Qassem has stepped down as his role as one of our chaplains. And I had some conversations with Imam Abdi Al-Fatah Tawakal. It's easier just to say Imam Tawakal. So he was very responsive to coming on board, and we're looking forward to his involvement in our chaplaincy program and other programs that we have within the LPS that includes our chaplains. So you'll probably see him around at various events. He's always been very supportive to come out to things, but now I think he's looking forward to his new role. So.
Great, thank you, Chief. And I see we have one of our chaplains up here. Maybe if you want to give her a shout out, as well as if you, oh, sorry, no? Oh, no, sorry. Well, I guess we just hired you on, I guess. But I guess if you could just.
Welcome anyway.
Welcome anyway. Chief, just for the members of the public that are following at home, this might be the first time that they've had the opportunity. If you could give us just a quick high level of this chaplaincy program, that might be helpful.
So the chaplaincy program, we have 4 members. Reverend David Carruthers, who has been a part of our program for over 30 years. Father Jim Mockler's just over 25 years. Rabbi Catherine Clark is, I think, about 5 years now. And so they're involved in, part of the larger wellness piece and the spiritual health of our members. Some of them, obviously are available if members are dealing with some issues in their life or within their families. They'll reach out to the chaplains, or sometimes our chaplains will reach out to them as well during times of need. But they're also a big component of, when we celebrate milestones in our organization, they're invited to attend those things. They often are walking through the building, and it's amazing you can actually feel a difference in our building when we have our chaplains walk through. It's a very positive vibe, and we're very fortunate to have them part of our family and part of the team to contribute to the overall the well-being of our members. So it's very good.
Great, thank you very much. That was very helpful. So look for a motion for that. To receive. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Helmer. All those in favor? And it carries. Disposition of returned items. I'll move it. Moved by the mayor. Seconded by Javid. All those in favor? And it carries. All right, now time to talk about money. So we'll head over to Deputy Chief Longworth, operating capital budget, and we'll look for any discussion, or if you wanted to start with any comments.
I was actually hoping for the opportunity to speak on the disposition of property so I could lead in, balance it off with I'm about to ask for. So as you know, the 2019, we're entering into our final year of the 4-year budget cycle. And this report deals specifically with both the operating and the capital budgets. There are no material changes to the 2019 operating budget, although we do anticipate there will be budget transfers within the approved amount that we have to look after things that we need to look after. There are no amendments to the approved capital budget in relation to the original 4-year cycle. However, there are a number of adjustments to our capital budget forecast for 2020 to 2028. And we've had discussions with City Finance already about those adjustments that we've had to make. So really subject to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy. And it looks to the board for any speakers. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and I'm glad to hear that it can be accommodated within the sort of original funding envelope. In terms of the capital budget changes in particular, I know that that's a long-term allocation over the 10-year period, and we're, in some cases, I imagine we're moving things around in terms of timing, but what are some of the magnitude of some of these changes? Do you think it's gonna be putting pressure on the capital budget, or is it a matter of reallocating what was in the existing capital budget out there in the future so that things are happening in different times?
Yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of the adjustments are a result of technology changes, equipment that's coming end of life sooner than expected. One in particular is our light armored vehicle. That's going to put some pressure on the capital budget because we need that sooner than later. The rest of it is we've tried to map it out as best we can. As you know, planning 10 years out, things change sometimes and we have to adjust and move them forward. Our conducted energy weapon devices, they're going to come end of life as a result of some warranty coverage that the providing company has changed. So those are kind of things that are out of our control, but they're thrust upon us. And these are pieces of equipment we absolutely cannot live without. So we've adjusted the budget accordingly.
Board members? All right, look for a motion to receive. Or sorry, it's to confirm. Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Susan. All those in favor? And it carries. Divisional presentation, situational tables, agenda. So it should be Deputy Chief Williams on this one.
I'm going to turn things directly over to Inspector Lynn Sutherland for this presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lynn Sutherland. I'm the Inspector of Patrol Support Branch, and I'm here to introduce you to an extraordinary individual who's taken on a great task. So I'd like to introduce you to Carl Noel. He's one of our crime prevention officers, one of two. So we keep them well occupied, don't we, Carl? Yes, very well occupied. So Carl and Kathy engage in things such as domestic audits, SETTED, crime prevention through environmental design. They assist our elderly, particularly in the area of fraud, and they attend neighborhood meetings to encourage crime prevention strategies. On top of all that, we've done a great deed and asked Carl to head our connectivity table. So he will be presenting to you regarding our connectivity table and what it is at present doing. So Carl.
Thank you, Inspector. Hi, and I've never been in chambers, so this is my first. And when I knew I was coming in after the budget, I actually thought there'd be a lot more doom and gloom, and there wasn't, which is great. London Connectivity is what we call our situation table. So situation tables in general is what I will discuss with you, and we'll get to, there we go, our specific table and how it applies to us. But it was just at the beginning of last year in 2017, and I can give credit to Deputy Chief Longworth, who not necessarily that a situation table is his idea, but that he was knowledgeable about them and how the other communities were applying them, and that he thought that London was in need of one. So from there, the inspector tasked my partner Kathy and I with creating our London Connectivity situation table. So what that meant was inviting every social agency we could think of, and there was upwards of 100 people at the first day, which was an 8-hour introduction and training day. So what situation tables are, without going, I'm not reading through the PowerPoint at all. I'll try and explain this in layman's terms. They did give me 10 minutes. So there are people in our community who find themselves in situations of acutely elevated risk, and I'll discuss that definition in a minute. But they end up using a lot of our services, and the service providers are all there and all willing, except that in the past, our service providers weren't talking to each other. So it wasn't as efficient and as effective as it could be. The history of situation tables has shown that when service providers get together and collaborate to help an individual, that there's a lot of success. And so what that means specifically for the police department would be less calls for service. If someone is constantly calling the police department, if through a situation table, we can introduce them to the community partners and everyone can wrap around and assist that individual, then they will be less taxing on the city's resources. It's actually the Ministry of Correctional Services and Community Safety that took on the endeavor to come up with rules and parameters as to how a situation table should run. So, when we had our training day, and I say there's 100 people there, it's not because every organization needs to meet on a weekly basis, but there are main organizations in our city that get used all the time. London Police being one, CMHA, mental health being another. So with the training, we determined that there were approximately 30 agencies that could participate on a weekly basis. So our situation table meets every Tuesday at 1:30, and there are anywhere between 20 and 30 agencies that are in attendance. So let's go to, this is a nice little diagram of how it actually works. So any agency is, we're all responsible for bringing situations to the table on a weekly basis. And as an agency, if you've exhausted all of your resources in trying to help an individual and it just doesn't seem to be working, at this point, you can reach out to other agencies for assistance. And when we sit on Tuesdays and you present your situation to the group, it gets presented in what we call de-identified data. Like there's no identification of the person. We just talk about the situation that they're in and what factors bring them to a point of being acutely elevated risk. So there are many, there are over 100 factors. They don't apply to everyone, but it's not just one thing that makes that person's situation acutely elevated. So, for example, if the London Police, I've identified a person who the police, we've been to their house numerous times in the recent past, and we've exhausted our resources with this person. Like there's nothing else we can do for them as far as the police department's resources go. So for me to show up at the situation table and give all of the examples and what this person's acutely elevated risk is, the next step would be that everyone would vote on if they agree that the situation is acutely elevated risk. And if we have a 75% vote, and if we vote that yes, it does meet the criteria, then we would identify which agencies are able to go out and assist and offer a support for this particular individual. Oftentimes there's 3 agencies, 4 agencies, maybe 5 agencies that are willing to offer service. So once we've done that, the 5 agencies will go off into another room. And at that point is where we can identify who the person is. Most agencies are able to check their database to see if they have that person already in their database. And within the 5 minutes that we're sitting there, we have to come up with a plan. And the plan is to assist someone who's at acutely elevated risk, is to reach out to them within the next 24 to 48 hours. So the plan is almost always that we go the next morning to try and introduce ourselves to the person. And the whole idea of the situation table is now for these organizations to just offer service and try and connect with the person. And at that point, the situation table has done its due diligence, its job. And if one of those agencies or two of those agencies actually connect with that person, they case manage that. It's not the situation table that case manages. One of the really important factors about a situation table is the sharing of private information, individual information. And many agencies are very reluctant to tell you anything about their client. So as part of our training, the Information Privacy Commission of Ontario came and did a 4-hour piece on the definition of acutely elevated risk. And if the person meets that criteria, that you are now allowed to share the information that you have about that person with another agency. All in the best interest of the person. All we want to do is go out and help them. So that was a big piece with large corporations like the mental health. But the goal of the situation table, of course, is to help those that are acutely elevated risk, which is 100% what we do. But what we've figured out, or what has happened over the course of a year, is that all of the same people meet on a Tuesday, and we all get to know each other. And now the agencies can rely on each other based on the relationship that we're building as we sit every Tuesday. So you just get to the point of there's a trust that you know that that agency is going to do the best that they can do. And if not, they will just come and ask you to help them. Whereas in the past, I don't know that the agencies were communicating that way. So that's one of the big bonuses. And so the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services have come up with a way to track the data. And they created a spreadsheet, if you will, an Excel. But they own the program, and as situation tables get created, they get onboarded to the program. So our London Connectivity was just onboarded last month in August. All of our previous data was on an Excel spreadsheet. They were able to put it all into their program, and now we log on and use theirs every Tuesday. So we're only able to see our own data, but they're able to see the data of 45 different situation tables, and then they can, and I am not an Excel spreadsheet guy, but one of our data guy on our situation table is, and the amount of graphs and information that he can pull out of this spreadsheet looks like, some of it looks like this. So these are actual numbers for our London Connectivity situation table. And so some of the highlights, I guess, from looking at this graph in the bottom left corner, the age categories of the people that are most often brought. So they're the youth from 12 to 17 years are the highest percentage of situations that we get. And then the adults, anywhere between 40 and like 60 plus, are the other group. And again, it can show gaps in service. If why is it always the same people, right? So I'm not the statistician, trust me, and those that do use this feel like they can extrapolate a whole lot of data that will be useful. You keep me in under 10 minutes if you can.
Almost there.
Right. So here's a few stats from, we've only been doing this for a year. We kind of got started in May, and as of July last year, we actually started with real situations that we were presenting. And so up until last Tuesday, there's 3 more, there's 72 in total. And so of the 69 that are up there, it says that 44 of those 69 met the threshold of acutely elevated risk. We all voted and said, yes, we will try and help these people. And then of the 44, there's 33 of them that resulted in the overall risk of that person being lowered as a result of connection to the community. So we're averaging roughly about 1 situation every week. There have been weeks where there are no situations, and then there have been weeks where there's 2 or 3. But on average, we're at least reaching out to 1 person on a weekly basis. And then the bottom of that screen just shows that the originating agency is the agency that will present the situation. The lead agency is the agency that will address the most acute risk that the person has. And then the assisting agencies, where it says London Police assists all the time, which I do. It's mostly for safety. And when other agencies are going to knock on the door and we don't know the individual and we're not sure of the situation and who may be there, that I only attend to make sure that everything's copacetic. That's one of the reasons why we are at the top of the assisting agency list. Here's a list of the community partners that sit at the table regularly. There is another whole list of ad hoc agencies that we can call when we need their specific services. And we are always trying and inviting agencies to come and be a part of the situation table. So does anyone have any questions that are specific to?
So specific to this chart here right now, or?
No, just about situation tables in general.
Great. Okay, so I'll look to the board and see if there's any questions so far. Councillor Helmer?
So first of all, thanks for the presentation. I thought you did a very good job of explaining something that not everyone on the board is going to be immediately familiar with. So good work. I imagine it's kind of nerve-wracking to stand there at the mic. It seems like things are going very well in terms of the situation table and people's participation in it. Have you had discussions amongst the community partners in terms of how people think it's going? Do people think that it's working? And have you noticed any sort of patterns of people sort of dropping out of participating because they're just finding it not useful, or more people wanting to come more regularly because they're finding it to be valuable to the work that they're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a topic of conversation all the time. Definitely a learning curve for us from its inception, which has only been a year. It's been about 14 months. We're learning as we go, and the more situations that we deal with, the more that we understand our role in trying to reach out to help someone. I think at first people were apprehensive about other people's rights and why should we be sharing this person's information? Like, are we sure we should be doing this? And yet the goal of the situation table is to do no harm. So by knocking on someone's door and reaching out and offering them services, it hasn't happened yet, but if someone couldn't believe that we were actually at their door, right, we still don't feel that we've stepped over any boundaries or we're doing anything wrong. So we are learning as we go. And more recently, there have been a few of the bigger community partners that have decided to be a part of, just recently, the Elgin Middlesex Detention Center comes every Tuesday and sits, and that's where a lot of our problems end up and we can't deal with them when they're behind bars, but now that this person's with us, that's our connection, right, to get into the system and try and offer them services.
Jafid?
I also wanted to thank you for the presentation. This is fantastic work, and I appreciate that as part of your role in crime prevention, the amount of bandwidth that it takes to be able to engage in these fulsome collaborations is a lot. So I commend you for that. Thank you for the presentation. I also wanted to add that oftentimes some of the most vulnerable individuals in our community fall through the cracks because we all keep to our sectors and our silos. So the situation table is an excellent example of how not only other organizations, but our police service is really thinking outside the box and serving the mandate of the service in an exemplary and exceptional way. So it makes me proud to be a Londoner. My one question, however, speaking about people's vulnerabilities, is I was fascinated that the vast majority of individuals that come to the table actually fall within the ages of about 16 to 25. To me, that's a very uniquely vulnerable period for mental illness. It's also a very vulnerable period for young people experiencing issues related to uncertain housing, homelessness, et cetera. But I wonder what your perspective might be on what kinds of cases or why we're seeing such a huge number of young people at this table.
Well, I'm not sure I have a specific answer for that. And in 26 years of being a police officer here in London, the city has definitely changed. I also spent 5 years as a high school resource officer, so that demographic is definitely one that is ever changing. I see mental health as one of the biggest issues that leads the young people to not want to follow the rules or not want to be at home or in that environment where they feel safe, and then that ends up putting them out on the street and fending for themselves. It's a pretty complex issue. So I'm not really sure why that demographic is the one that keeps coming back to the table. It could be many agencies that are presenting, so it's not just London Police saying that it's always that demographic that is vulnerable, but all I can do is even on a quarterly or yearly basis, I could provide stats on how the connectivity table is going and what situations and what demographics, and but no, I don't know why.
Thank you very much. Let me go to Susan and Councillor Helmer.
Following up on your comment about stats, I wonder, was my sense from your presentation that this is really focused on identifying an individual and then trying to lower that elevated risk. Is there any room, and again, speaking to the bandwidth issue, to look at the overall trends that we're seeing? David mentioned age. I noticed that 63% were women who were being identified as elevated risk. Do the organizations ever look at those trends and think, okay, is there something preventative? Or are you so focused on doing your main mandate, which is the individuals themselves, that you're not able to do that?
And I guess the answer to that is this has just been our first full year. We're in the process of organizing an annual meeting where we're going to invite like upwards of 150 community partners to come, and so we can try and explain to them our situation table and what it does for our city. And eventually, like I am just one of the seats at the table. But as we have two co-chairs that are in charge of rules and regulations when we sit every time. So I'm going to go so far as to say, I'll assume that with the statistical data that we can identify a few areas very specifically as to why do we think that it's the youth? Why is it the 12 to 20 or the elderly? But that has not been something that we have discussed as a group.
Councillor Helmer?
That's precisely what I wanted to ask about, was whether, you know, any changes to programming or anything has come out yet. I mean, I imagine it's kind of early to know, but as you work through more and more situations, like you say, I think it would naturally lead to that kind of discussion, which is, say, we seem to have people in the same kind of situation over and over again, so, you know, are we going to change more broadly? But maybe that could be something that happens in the future, right? I do appreciate, and I think it was clear in the introduction, the focus is talking about very specific situations and try how to fix that specific problem. And I think, you know, the more general things maybe will come after it. I'm really glad to see too that this is something that, and we've heard about it elsewhere as a board, that we've seen working in other communities, and we're adopting it here, but in a very specific implementation with our community partners, that, you know, with the problems that people are experiencing in our community. And I'm glad to see this working fairly well so far.
So very specifically, when we had our training at the very beginning, one of our speakers was someone from Toronto, and he works for the City of Toronto. And he's been involved with their situation tables, and they have situation tables for neighborhoods. They have like a 4-block radius that would be just, we have to deal with our problems within this 4 blocks. But he was probably the most optimistic person I've ever heard speak on the statistical part of it and how they've adapted and how they're changing the way that they do things, because it always seems to be the same, right, problem. So as far as the Ministry of Correctional Services and Community Safety goes, and their RTD, which is tracking data. Risk tracking data is what this RTD program is that we've been onboarded to. I think that is the idea of the stats. We talk about situations, we input the statistical data for that day, but then at the end of the year, whenever someone can look at that and say, we have a real issue here, but that hasn't happened with the our London connectivity table yet.
Looking around, is there any other speakers? Chief?
Just a comment on what this is accomplishing and some of, you know, some historical examples, and many will remember the story around $1 Million Murray here in London that we know was having, I think it was close to 1,000 interactions between police, EMS, and other social services. Essentially what happened in that case is it was actually Sergeant Lorna Bruce that started seeing him come out of cells almost on a daily basis, wondering what's going on with this fellow, and looked into it and realized we need to do more for this individual. And the wraparound services, she went knocking on doors, and if anyone knows Lorna, she could be rather aggressive to get services. And what came out of this is that gentleman has moved on. It's addressed his addiction issues, his mental health, his homelessness. And I don't think we've had an interaction with him ever again. And every once in a while they check in on things that he's doing in his life, which he never really had an opportunity to do. So this is kind of what this work will do, we hope. And it is one person at a time, but it's great work that those silos are coming down and people are working together on it, so.
Great, just looks at the board.
We would love if to be invited. I think I speak on behalf of the board to the annual general meeting, so I hope you'll keep us in mind and let us tag along and take credit, whatever. We'll give you all the credit, but yeah, I think many of us would be very interested in going.
That definitely, the invitations will be there.
So just look, Inspector, did you want to say something as well, or you're good? Okay, just look around, so you know other speakers. I just want to conclude by saying, and I'll give you an opportunity to say anything else that you'd like at the end, but just want to thank you, Constable Noel, for doing this. And I think the police service is very lucky to have you in this position. It sounds like from your resume and kind of your experience, especially considering the demographics you're dealing with, and the knowledge that you brought forward has been very helpful in educating this board. So thank you very much. Phenomenal work, and keep up the great work. So, and I'll just turn it over to you if you have anything else you wanted to add.
No, just thank you very much for having me.
So I think we need a motion to receive that presentation. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Javid. All those in favor? And it carries. All right. Community mental health crisis. Dr. Javid.
you, Chair. So I'm sure folks are aware that mental health is an issue that affects us all. Over the past several years, we've seen an increasing demand for mental health services. As many of us know, there's a crisis that's unfolding in communities like London and across Ontario and Canada. Whether we've experienced our own difficulties or we know and love someone with lived experience in the system, we know that we don't actually have a mental health system. We have a myriad of hyper-fragmented systems and sectors, and the status quo is not serving anyone well. Within our police service, our frontline officers are being exposed to increasing demands with complex mental health problems that are clinically challenging crises, and these demands have not been commensurate with increased resources for our frontline officers, and I believe that that in and of itself will take a toll. We know that there's data on first responder mental health that's showing an increased risk of mental illness and PTSD for our frontline officers. We also know that cultures of stoicism lead to stigma against help seeking. And we know that our police service is taking action to fight this problem, and we're happy to hear that. But for our service to be able to address these issues, we cannot expect our officers to continue to respond to a crisis that really is a crisis in healthcare, a crisis that needs more resources, a crisis that needs collaboration, but one that must be addressed from a multi-systemic way. The other thing that is even more challenging about this crisis is that the kinds of problems that our officers are facing are quite complex, particularly when we have developmentally vulnerable patients. So being able to address and calibrate the response in accordance with the developmental needs of someone with complex mental illness is intrinsically challenging, and the existing curricula that's offered by police colleges simply has not kept up the pace. Our service has been taking the lead through examples like we heard of today in collaborations with community mental health organizations, collaborations that aren't just token collaborations, but efforts that our service have engaged in to really work with community mental health experts so that we can leverage their expertise and support for our officers, and remember that that individual with training may be best positioned to respond to an individual in crisis, so that we don't have to stigmatize individuals who are suffering further, and we can lead them to crisis centers and mental health treatment before police get involved. So in line with all these comments, I propose to move the following: that the London Police Services Board seeks to address the community mental health crisis by number one, exploring ways to support first responder mental health within the police service. Number two, advocating for improved mental health training for frontline officers. And number three, pursuing and supporting meaningful cross-sector collaborations with community mental health agencies.
Thank you very much, Shavi. So I see that was been moved by yourself, and looking for a seconder, second by Susan. And did you want to speak, Susan?
I just want to thank Dr. Sakara for bringing this matter forward. I think this is something that I have no doubt, and I've seen firsthand that London Police Services has been struggling to address, and I know all our chiefs have been actively involved in reaching out to other agencies, but I think on the ground, it continues to be the police who seems to be dealing with the majority of at least initial contact, which is obviously highly problematic. And combined, I appreciate in particular that your focus is not just community mental health, but also the mental health of our officers. So fully support this motion, and would like, after this motion has been passed and we start exploring, to come back and have some concrete advocacy that we can put out there as well as a secondary step.
Chief?
I'd just like to thank the board member for bringing this forward, because there are huge concerns in both, our members' mental health and the mental health issues that are occurring in our community. We had some earlier discussions in our meeting, but if I could do it in two different areas to address it. So the issues within our community, I think if you look back historically on what London Police Service has done around this, I have to think of the work that retired Deputy Chief Ian Peer did with this. And one of the parting gifts that he gave the Police Service Board of the day was his presentation on the issues within our community around mental health and the challenges we were facing. And one of the things he talked about was having an effective mobile crisis response team and working with the community to develop that. And the other two things that I need to mention is the work that was done by a former member, Lisa Heslop, with the Donner Study, which looked at the number of persons with mental illness that came into or are at risk of becoming into contact with the justice system. And she did a fair bit of work in two reports, actually, one in 2001 and one in 2011, that outlined you know, the findings. And shockingly, when you look at the actual dollars that are spent by police services dealing with it, so in 2000 was estimated $5 to $7 million was spent of the police budget responding to calls for service related to all categories of persons with mental illness. And in 2011, that grew to $12.5 million of our budget. And it was expected, if it was unchecked, that by 2015, it would reach $16 million. And Vancouver Police kind of modeled that as well. They've had two reports, one in 2008, one in 2010. And they talk about the impact on their resources. And in 2008, it was 90 full-time police officers at an annual cost of $9 million, essentially doing very similar to what we're doing here. So the problem is not just here, it's across our country. What it really boils down to, and you are absolutely correct with the healthcare issue, because this cannot be resolved just from an enforcement or from a police perspective, and it's something that we continue to struggle with. One of the interesting things after Deputy Chief Peer retired, we didn't end our work. In fact, we picked up from his lead and followed up with you know, the collaborations in our community under Superintendent Bill Chantler, who continues to be involved with CMHA Ontario. In fact, he's either the president or past president of CMHA Middlesex. He's either past president or president of that. His work with the enhanced mental health strategy in our community, where there's several different partners at the table, including the City of London, Child Youth Services, and the various, the LIN as well. But in 2012, we actually struck Middlesex Community Mental Health Crisis Response, and with the help of the LIN, we brought together all the various organizations in the community. We have a very effective mobile crisis response team that we deal with very well on a daily basis and work very well with for 24/7, 365 service. And we're one of very few, I think maybe only the second community in Ontario that has a crisis center. And the value that that's brought to our community is amazing. And it's not just from a policing perspective, because it gives us an alternative of, rather than apprehending an individual and bringing them to emerge, we can use the crisis response team that'll come out and assess and maybe take them back to the crisis center. We can bring people to the crisis center. What's more amazing in our community is we have people, rather than calling the police or going to emerge, are going to the crisis center themselves. And in fact, I love the story, and this was right after it opened up. It was a pizza delivery mail that found an individual mental health crisis. Rather than calling the police or doing nothing, he actually took them to the crisis center. So those are the amazing stories that happen in our community and the work that's being done to support individuals that are in crisis. So I know that you've put forward a couple ideas, and I strongly suggest that you connect with Superintendent Bill Chantler, who's done a lot of work and can provide you with a lot of information that what is working here and where some of those gaps are in our community. The other thing you talked about is the mental health of our members. And, you know, I think back, 10 years ago, we probably didn't have much discussion about it at all. But it's really come to the forefront in the last 6 to 8 years. I know representatives from the association here, and they've been very, not only locally, but provincially very strong around response to officers' mental health. This summer was not good in policing in Ontario, with several members taking their own lives, and it's a tragedy. But it is something that's all hands on deck trying to figure out what the solution is here. And I don't know if there is a silver bullet into it. There was a conference or a seminar back in October of last year where they brought together experts to talk about the various programs and services that are being offered. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, there's enough research to say what it is. But one of the things they talked about is don't stop what you're doing and offer a variety, a menu of things that are available to your, to members. So I just wanted to touch base on a couple of things that we do here for our members and in our efforts to try to do more. We have some training and awareness. So we provided the Road to Mental Readiness training to our members. And in fact, in the fall of last year, we extended it to family members. And the idea around this is to recognize when members are, have a change in their mental health and help to build resiliency. And reaching out to the family members so they could recognize, because they see these people on a regular basis as well, as they see some change in their behaviors and where they can get help for themselves or for their members. We have peer support, which is a fairly new program, probably within the last 4 years. What's nice about this is the peer support team are made up of members that were nominated by their peers. And so these are members that bring a unique personal experience and perspective to the table. They don't provide counseling per se, but they do get some specialized training and they reach out to members or members reach out to them to provide them with support. We have retired members on there. And we have chaplains that are all part of that. We've had a critical incident stress management team. I can go back to the 90s. I remember an incident that I was involved in the first time I attended one of the debriefs. And it's something that we continue to develop and continue to use. And something that in the last couple of years that we've brought on is we've had some incidents that were quite traumatic. And we were concerned about our members and the impact. And we've actually brought in a psychologist from another police service, a police psychologist, very experienced. And although some members may have not liked the idea, but we actually ordered them and directed them that they would meet with the psychologist. And so I think it's twice now that we've had to do that. And we continue to use his services when we can. The other thing that is new, and if there's anything, I'll make a recommendation to the board after I speak to this about the psychological wellness. But it's a program that's around the Safeguard program, and it is really starting to develop into a worthwhile program. Currently, London Police Service does not have a full-time Safeguard program or across our organization. It really is we don't have a full-time psychologist available to us. We have to bring in on an as-need basis, and we only work on high-risk units. So it doesn't touch across our organization. But we know, and from our members that have been impacted by this, that they're not just in high-risk units. It's across our organization where people are impacted by the things that they have to see on a daily basis. And so there's part of this is regular check-ins with a psychologist and doing some testing just as a proactive measure more than anything. But if I was to make any request that if we wanted to add to a list of things available to our members is to look at implementation of a Safeguard program across our organization, which requires resources. And I would even ask if the board would be considered revising our 2019 budget request to include resources that would bring in a full-time psychologist and support services for our members. So the cost, it's always the cost of it, but it seems rather expensive, but I'll put it this way, is I am fairly confident that $300,000 would give us the resources we need to cover a full-time psychologist and support staff. And what that would do is implement the Safeguard program across our organization, both sworn and civilian members, because we have civilian members that face similar things in various roles in our organization that also need to be looked at. And if you want to look at $300,000 being expensive, just consider if we prevent 2 members going off on WSIB for a year. And remember, we're a Schedule II employer. That's salaries, benefits, 25%, I think it's 25, it's probably higher now, administrative fee that we have to pay to WSIB, and that's all treatments and programs for our members. And we've had members that did not, the treatment and programs offered through WSIB didn't help them, and we've gone above and beyond that and paid for some of those, some treatment for our members to make sure we can get them back. So that $300,000 seems like a large amount of money, but when you consider if it's going to prevent 2 members from going off for 1 year, and 1 year only, that's a total cost recovery in my mind, so.
Thank you very much, Chief. That's very much appreciated. So maybe if I can, because I think if we should deal with that one first separately, if the board's okay with that. And so if possible, if Susan can chair, and I'll.
That's fine.
Thank you. So I'm more than happy to support that. This is I'm glad the chief brought this up. I didn't even have a discussion with the chief about this, but based on what I've known already and from, in the past conversations with Rick from the association and other members of the police service and just seeing the real realities that some of our members are facing, I think this is something that can't wait. I think this is something that should be implemented immediately. And I think for me, it's not about the costs or the impacts to maybe our budget, because at the end of the day, these are individual Londoners and these are people who serve our community and put themselves at risk every single day. So I'm prepared to move that motion, and I'll look to the chair to see if there's a seconder.
Sorry, Chair, clarifying the motion brought by the chief?
Yes, so the recommendation from administration for the resources of $300,000 for the implementation of a full-time safeguard program here at London Police Service.
Is there anyone who'd like to second? Go ahead, Jesse.
So I have a question. So I don't want to take the discussion away from what Javid had suggested earlier. I think actually that's on the floor. I'm not sure if it is or not, but in terms of how we could actually handle that, would it be possible to get a specific report about the safeguard program? I mean, the chief just brought it up now. It sounds very promising, but I think, do we have time between now and the next meeting in October? And if we were to make a decision, then can that still feed into the city budget process, like in terms of the timeline? Can we have that happen? Because I think having a suggestion around what the budget implication will be and what exactly the safeguard program is and what it will provide, I think that's helpful for us and also for members of the public to see, how it's going to be beneficial. Because I think it's very promising, but I'd like to make sure we have time to, see something in advance to make sure we know exactly what it is that it involves and that we have time to do it with the timelines for the city budget process.
Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you very much. I certainly am supportive in principle of the motion, and I'm pleased that the chair brought this forward. And I also understand the comments that Member Helmer has raised when we're talking about looks very promising, but maybe we need a little bit more information. And so I wonder if the chair would consider some subject to language within the motion, which is that the board approve this in principle, subject to a business case coming back in October, so that then we can take a look at this safeguard program, recognizing it will have an impact on the budget, recognizing that it's the right thing to do. It would just be packaged in a way, I think, that, that there might be more comfort on the board approving it more quickly.
Chair, are you open to that amendment?
Yes, and I guess this sounds as if the seconder would be the mayor then?
So the motion would be to approve the safeguard program in principle, but subject to a more fulsome business report coming back to us in October and business case, so the board can have some further discussions, but certainly in principle that we approve that direction. Is that correct? And seconded by the mayor?
The program Safeguard, I don't want to be pinned down to one program, but it's about bringing in a psychologist and the support staff to implement what's right now is currently called the Safeguard program, but it's a wellness program that deals with a psychologist. But we'll lay it out more fulsome in a business case for you to understand, but that's the dollars, those are the human resource costs associated to that program.
So for clarity, it would be further details to be provided as part of that business case. All in favor? Or any other discussion? No? All in favor? Carried. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and apologies. I just thought that would be a separate item, and I didn't want to take away from the bigger conversation. But thank you again, administration, for bringing that forward and advocating for your members. So I'm glad to see that there's support from the board. Javid?
So I'm glad we were able to make that happen, because it just illustrates, again, our commitment as a board to addressing these issues in a fulsome way. And to the chief's report, I think it speaks to all the efforts that have been undertaken thus far to address a very complex and challenging issue that draws upon resources and is a challenge to address for the service. The motion that I put forward really speaks to us as a board recognizing those challenges, helping to support our chief and our service in terms of addressing them in adherence with best practice, and recognizing the complexity of the challenge.
So I'll look to the board for Mayor Brown.
Yeah, just to speak to the motion that we were discussing just previous to that last one. You look at the bullets that are here. In the first bullet is to explore ways to support first responder mental health within the police service. And I think we've done exactly that today in the spirit of the motion that you've brought forward, and maybe even more quickly than you had anticipated. And so that's, I think, good news. I think it demonstrates the commitment of this board to the members of London Police Service. What I will say is that I can't think of a more important motion that we'll be passing over this, the remainder of this term and certainly this year. I look at my single day experience on a ride along from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. With London Police Service, and just how profoundly impacted I was by that, by the level of stress that our officers experience, with no warning, and the number of mental health issues that people are experiencing within our community. This is before Ian Pier's program came forward, and I can recall clearly seeing half a dozen or more police cars at emergency at 3 o'clock in the morning. I can recall, being in situations in individuals' homes where they were clearly in crisis, and the level of professionalism that our police service members demonstrated was really phenomenal. This was also their last shift in the cycle. This is when it was a 7 or 8 day shift, 7-day shift. So it was the last night of working 7 nights in a row. And people were extremely tired and doing an incredible job, but certainly demonstrated a need for supports like this. 20 years ago, I don't know if we'd be able to have this conversation, but I think that if we can do this and demonstrate a commitment, then we're headed in the right direction. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Councillor Helmer.
I support the motion that Javid has brought forward, but listening to the chief speaking about the issues that we're seeing in terms of mental health, not just on frontline officers, but across the entire organization. I wonder if we can make a small amendment to the language so that it's not, the second bullet is not limited to frontline officers, but includes everybody, because I think people in different places in the organization are exposed to different kinds of things that would put them at risk for mental health issues.
So I saw nods from the mover and seconder, so I think that was supportive. So looking for any other speakers on this? So then I'll just conclude real quickly and say thank you, Javid, for bringing this forward. This is great, and I think it speaks to the board's intent to make a difference and to support the members and support the members of the public as well. So I'm really happy to see this coming forward, and I think it's, I'm especially comforted in knowing that, we have leadership that from administration side that can speak freely about and openly about these difficult conversations around mental health. And I think it provides a clear example of what leadership is for the frontline officers all the way through. So I thank you, Chief, for speaking about mental health today. So without further ado, we'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? And it carries. So looking for any new business? Hold on one second. All right. So the date of the next meeting will be Thursday, October 18th, 2018. And we do have our open mic, but we will adjourn first, and then we'll go to the open mic. And I'm aware of one member of the public coming to speak to us, and any member of the public is free to speak as well. So look for a motion to adjourn. Police board meeting, moved by Helmer, seconded by Javid. All those in favor? And it carries. So now we'll ask members of the public if they would like to come speak before the police service board. There's an open mic right here down here on this level right here, as well as microphones upstairs for any members who wish to speak. No name is needed. They can just come up and speak directly to the board. So I'll just look around at the top to see if any speakers want to speak. Going once up there, going twice. Here's your chance, Rick. Going 3 times. Not seeing anyone from upstairs. So I'll look down here and see if there's any speakers. And when you're ready, and there's a microphone right here, we'll get that set up for you.
Hear me? Okay, I've got a bit of a cold. I am the executive director of the London Abused Women's Centre, and I've heard today a lot of issues raised about mental health and addictions, and those are really important issues. And I want to raise another issue which is so important, which is about male violence against women in their intimate relationships. In his book, The War on Women, Brian Valley's research showed that between 2000 and 2006, 44 Canadian soldiers were killed in Afghanistan, including 4 who died in accidents and 6 who were killed in friendly fire. In Canada, during that exact same timeline, 16 law enforcement officers were killed in the line of duty, while another 41 died from non-hostile causes, including 16 in car accidents, 7 in aircraft accidents, and 3 in motorcycle accidents. The combined total of all Canadian military and law enforcement deaths for that 7-year period was 101. In Canada, during that same 7-year time period, 500 women, 5 times as many, were shot, stabbed, strangled, or beaten by their intimate male partners. The Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability reports that during the first 8 months of our year, 2018, 106 women and girls have been killed, primarily by men. And of that number, 50% were killed in Ontario. This means that on average, a woman is killed every other day in Canada. And Indigenous women and girls are overrepresented, given they comprise 22% of the victims, but only 4.8% of our population. Almost 1/3 of the 106 killings were intimate femicides. 33 women killed by their intimate male partners. 25 of those were killed by a current male partner, and 8 were killed by an estranged male partner. They were killed by gunshots, stabbings, and/or beaten to death. Almost half of these victims were killed in their homes. Women remain at greatest risk of serious harm or homicide in their homes, the place that is supposed to be the safest place for them to be. 106 women and girls killed, primarily by men, in an 8-month period of time. This should cause outrage in our communities across the country. We hear from mayors, premiers, the Prime Minister, and police chiefs on an ongoing basis who condemn the deaths of police officers or members of the military. We hear from them during mass shootings, and so we should. There are memorials and celebrations of life for police officers and military personnel. They have highways and bridges named after them. And that is important. It helps communities grieve, and it helps us remember those who have fallen. Yet these same leaders remain silent when women are killed by their former or current intimate partners. Murdered women do not have a highway of heroes named after them. Murdered women and girls remain invisible. There is no action plan to end the atrocity of femicide. It's absent, and the message it sends to communities is that whether alive or dead, women remain dispensable. Remember, more women and girls were killed in Canada in the first 8 months of 2018 than those killed in the Canadian military and law enforcement over a 7-year period of time. Unlike the military and law enforcement, women do not sign up for being in the line of fire. They don't go to school. They don't have training to deal with combat in their homes. They don't carry guns or tasers or batons. They don't have radio contact with a dispatcher in the event they need assistance. Rather than being part of a team to provide backup, women and girls have a partner whose goal is to gain and maintain power and control over them, sometimes using the tactic of ultimate control, murder. Women rarely report to the police because they are fearful of their partners. They are fearful of police, and they are fearful of not being believed and not being protected. Women who do report to police want to be told, "We believe you. We are going to provide you with every tool at our disposal to make sure you are safe. We are going to look at the situation objectively and ensure that if you are a victim, your abuser will not be allowed contact with you under any circumstance, and they need to be provided with the conditions of the abuser's release. They need to be told, we will try to keep you safe." Intimate femicide is preventable, but it requires a comprehensive understanding of the dynamics of male violence against women in their intimate relationships, and a commitment to ensure that every single woman who reports to police leaves that police station with every tool at an officer's disposal to keep her safe. Because when that doesn't happen, women are at risk of being killed. We need women to be heard and believed. And we need to make sure that the police understand that a man who presents in public as a really good guy is sometimes a complete abusive asshole at home. We need a police department that pledges to be accountable for women's safety. This is a war on women. And women are on the front lines every single day just trying to survive. We need reinforcements, and we need to know that when we call for help, the police will arrive and stand in solidarity with us every single time. 106 women are dead in the first 8 months of the year. I've brought copies of their names. And I'm going to ask if you would please take the time to read them. They are mothers and sisters and daughters, and they matter. And their lives have been extinguished for no other reason than their sex. Imagine for one moment that this happened to you. It's your wife, your daughter, your sister, your mother, your best friend is gone, killed because she's a woman. We have to rise to the occasion and make women's safety the priority. We have to commit to do better. Women's lives depend on it. And if it's a resource issue at police services that's preventing women from being safe, then we will stand with you for more money. But it needs to change because too many women are falling through the cracks. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission today. So just look for any other members of the public wishing to speak to the police board. Going once, going twice. Sorry, did you have a question, ma'am, up there?
Hi. So for domestics, I'm wondering, what do you implement into your protocol when you take on a call? We know that domestics reoccur several times before somebody leaves.
Sorry, so you were just asking us a question, or you just?
Yeah.
Okay, so for this part of the portion of the meeting, we just ask members to give their feedback, but we're happy to circle back with you and get you those answers directly if you like as well. I can have someone come up there and get your contact information and get some information for you on that. So just looking for any other members of the public? Going once, going twice, and 3 times. So that'll conclude the open mic, and I thank every member for the public for attending today. The board will be meeting in relation to an in-camera item, so the board meeting is still ongoing regarding, yes, so in committee room 3. So thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.